Hello, Thomas. Thank you so much for being part of my podcast that I'm doing with Ad Latina. That's fantastic that I have the help of Ad Latina as well on this. And I have had a big number of great leaders of strategy to talk about how we are using AI on a strategic perspective for the strategy to create not only the briefs, but how AI helps the strategies on that, and about the curiosity of strategies, what are the main skills and what they should be adopting now to update themselves as well as a strategic role for the brands on the communication. But the subject that I like the most, as you know, to talk about connects with diversity, equity, and inclusion, ESG, triple bottom line, the profit, planet, and people, and especially connected to Goodvertising. That is not only the book that you wrote, but the consultancy that you have. And it's very interesting to have you participated on this podcast, my friend. Thanks a lot for it.
Rafa, thank you so much. I mean, for me, I think being here today and talk about strategy is important for me. I think strategy is really sort of, problem solving. It's creativity and fun. It's a lot of things, and I think unfortunately strategy doesn't get the limelight that sometimes it really deserves because often we end up sitting in Cannes or at D&AD and just look at the amazing work and sometimes forget a lot of the hard background work that it actually takes to sort of build the foundation of the house. So we fall in love with the roof, but we forget what the hard work that happened in the basement. And then secondly, I'm also very pleased for your strong support of good advertising and purpose. I think it's really up to each and every one of us to sort of think about how we want to apply our creative skills, our strategic skills. And yes, we can actually build. And I think the future of long lasting and long living brands has to immerse themselves and understand the reality in terms of purpose and sustainability.
Yeah, I'm looking for that as well. And I believe that in the future that will happen more. But I believe that we can help now for the brands and the clients to think more about that and connect to that. What's your experience? I mean, when have you changed or adapted yourself to be looking more for that, for the purpose and the social and environmental impact of the brands on the narrative since you started as a marketeer, as someone from the advertising industry?
You know what? It's been a crazy roller coaster ride with ups and downs and sidetracks and going backwards and whatnot. I mean, my journey started around 2009 and was sort of provoked by the climate summit that we were hosting in Copenhagen. And as you mentioned, that was sort of what provoked a little heavy book, Good Advertising here, exactly. Which was at the time sort of like a naive rallying cry to our industry to say, wait a moment, maybe there's a better way forward in terms of building brands, in terms of applying our skills in the world of advertising. And so basically, advertising was a collection of case studies. It was hopefully a cry to all of our colleagues in the industry to understand how we hopefully actually can build brands. And the thesis at that time was quite simple that if you do something that's good for people and planet, it will be good for brand and bottom line. And that was sort of my naive mantra back in 2009 when Good Advertising started as a book and became a website and a movement and obviously also a sort of consultancy.
And what were you doing before of that? Was your role on this industry?
Classic advertising. I've used to run a small medium-sized agency and before that I started out as a copywriter. So really not very original if you think about it. These days art directors always ends up being DJs and copywriters end up publishing books. So talk about lack of creativity there in doing a book. But for me, it probably wasn't something that I necessarily sort of said, yeah, I want to write a marketing book. It was just something that was sort of pushed to me because I uh, really felt that I had a hard time working in industry and not being value aligned with the work that I was doing. So it was a very sort of personal quest for me at that time.
And after that, with the good advertising, the consultancy that you have, and even the outside of that with other agencies, what do you believe if you could give me two examples of brands that have done that, one that you have helped for them to do it, for being environmental and social responsible and helping to connect that with the purpose of the brand that you have helped, the good advertising consultancy have helped, and also any other brand that you believe is the most interesting one to tell that they have done that in the recent years, please?
I mean, that, yeah, I mean, the interesting thing was in Goodvertising, one of the things I really wanted to do at that time was obviously showcase best practice. And believe it or not, it was so difficult to find, which is obviously fundamentally very different from today, where we see those cases shine at Cannes and do really, really well at Cannes. Um, so uh, back 2010, it was, Body Shop, it was United Colors of Benetton, it was the early days of Unilever's journey with some of their brands like Dove, Chipotle were some of the brands that was covering in the book. And interestingly enough, if I look back at the book today, we had a lot of car brands. Hyundai won and did really, really well in Cannes that year with Honda Gris, which was a beautiful illustrated commercial with sort of like a little sing-along tune, hate something, change something, which was this mantra from Hyundai about making better diesel engines. So diesel engines that are better for the environment. And today looking back at some of those car ads, we would probably look at them as greenwashing. And which also sort of shines a light on the fact how difficult it is to work in the space of ESG, sustainability, purpose. And I think we are witnessing that. We witnessed that in Brazil with Bolsonaro and the political movement that happened there. We see that in the US with Vogue, anti-Vogue, the rhetoric. So lots have changed since then. I think in terms of some of the work we do, I mean, I think I've had the pleasure of working on small behavior change stuff to bigger sort of brand platform stuff. And one of the pieces of work I still to this day really like was a piece of work we did for Carlsberg, the brewery. And it was like a lot of other breweries, founded on good principles with the founder having sort of a societal obligation, and that was something he spoke about already in those founding years. And so when Carlsberg came to us, they really wanted to create a platform that could both motivate internally and externally in terms of helping drive innovation, activations, etc. And so what we set out for them to do was actually just create a really, really simple narrative, which was called Together Towards Zero, and carving out some pillars around water. I mean, water is one of those very scarce resources, and today a lot of companies are faced with water scarcity and production plants, whether you're Coca-Cola, Carlsberg, and so water, carbon emissions, but also around drinking, which was really interesting. So there we sort of reframed it, zero irresponsible drinking, more choice. And it was also uh, to open up for innovation. And Carlsberg have been very good at opening up for sort of other non-alcoholic innovations and sort of driving that through the portfolio. And obviously today, as many other beer brands, we see obviously non-alcoholic beers being a key part of it. But for me, Together Towards Zero was just creating a very simple program that if you're the CEO, you understand it. If you are factory work on the floor, you understand it. And for us to sort of create a program that was so inherent into what people easily can understand is important, because sustainability, what is that? Carbon emissions, what is that? But when you can suddenly translate it into something that's very relatable for people and creating the icons around it, in that way, we sort of succeeded, at least pushing the brewer to have a program that everybody could buy into. And so I'm always happy when I see new innovations coming out, snap packs and other things that Carlsberg do in terms of driving and leading the sustainability agenda in the brewery industry.
I haven't tasted yet the Carlsberg Zero, but I have the Heineken Zero, Corona Zero, and I would love to do that because that's very interesting for me that I'm on a sober time right now in the last 2 years. But I would love to do it.
And you know what, right? I mean, it's amazing to see how uh, that has completely, transformed. I mean, it is the fastest growing category, and I think a lot of people um, embrace it because, you don't have to feel a little bit slow and tired if you drink a beer during the day. There's a lot of advantages, and I think a lot of that innovation for that industry is pivotal. Obviously, alcohol is damaging to society overall, and so obviously working on your portfolios is key to adapting to that change, and obviously also living up to sort of societal commitments.
And I was thinking about sustainable marketing in a way, because on the definition, I believe that is more connected not only on doing the communication, but also on doing this provocation on the products and how we do it and the impact. And then I have sometimes a challenge, a brain challenge to understand the definitions of sustainable marketing, ESG in advertising, the connection with diversity, equity, and inclusion on advertising, and of course with good advertising. Could you help me on the definition of those things and the connection, like sustainable marketing and ESG in advertising? What are the connections between that, and of course with advertising as well? What's the
Yeah. I
difference?
mean, if we still have anybody viewing this when we go into this little definition dictionary, stay with us. And
Yeah.
also, yeah, one thing I will say, you know, what makes sustainability so difficult to work with is that sustainability is from Mars and marketing is from Venus. It's two very different disciplines because one, the world of sustainability is very much driven by logic. It's often a very complex world. It's never really just black and white. And the world of marketing is obviously where the magic happens. It's about emotions. It's about simple messages, and it's about sparking us to drive action. And I think that's often why we often see this clash, and that's also why I wanted to bring in the Carlsberg example as one of the sort of more logical pieces on which you can build the magic, the foundation, the storytelling, all that stuff that excites us. But yes, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of terms that people will be hearing in this space, and I'll trust you that even in the world of advertising, where we love abbreviations and new terms, it's a whole new universe that obviously opens up in the world of sustainability. So depending on what lens you view the world in Latin America and the US, there's a lot of talk about ESG, so environment, society, and governance, to sort of take a look at the company's role. So environment would typically cover things like water usage, land usage, carbon emissions, packaging, quite key for a lot of brands. So that's sort of the E. The S is where you'd find one of your key topics, obviously diversity and inclusion. You'd look at the community. You'd look at not only at your shareholders, but at your stakeholders more broadly. So, fair trading practices, supply chain stuff, how your work is treated. Um, and then finally, the G, which is more the governance. So how are your governance structures, which is also very, very key. So typically you see, for example, when you had the Volkswagen scandal recently, not only was the CEO also the chairman, so it's very hard to kind of keep consistent accountability for a company like Volkswagen at that time, which obviously led to Dieselgate and other adverse effects. So that's the sort of world of ESG. In other places, people might have heard about SDGs, so Sustainable Development Goals, and these are the 17 goals that the United Nations launched to sort of say what do we all need to do towards 2030, and they cover 17 different topics from and a lot of it has to do and falls under the ESG, but it can be sustainable consumption. It can be education, a lot of these other topics, and number 17 of that is collaboration, which I think is a beautiful one to sort of you know give to the fact that we only succeed driving this much needed change if we work together.
That's
So that was a
fantastic.
little bit of the sort of definition
No, that's
jungle.
great. And I would say an inspiration because I have studied the SDG and the that and the things, but I haven't connected that with advertising. But it makes a lot of sense considering the 17 things. One of them is no hunger, and that could be interesting for us to think about society as well. Not only, but there are another things over there. So that's interesting to have a new definition, maybe the all the S's in advertising, all the S's in Portuguese, but the SDGs in advertising or something around that, because that connects the other points, the sustainable
Yeah.
marketing, the ESG in advertising, and of course, good advertising is over there as well, in a way that the impact, the consequence of that, you can have good advertising as well from the brands that are doing it.
Yeah, if it's confusing for people, I mean, a good place to go and read is or check out is actually Ken Lyons, which back in, I believe, 2018 now inaugurated a line dedicated to the Sustainable Development Goals, and I judged the second time, and for me it was a little bit of a full circle. Yeah, I was very pleased about it because one of the first people I interviewed for my book Goodvertising was David Droga, which at that time was with Droga 5, and they were already doing a lot of interesting work in the sort of sustainability space, like the TAP project and others. And David was my chairman, so I felt it was like a decade later, almost full circle, speaking about the change that needed to happen in the industry, and then actually see, wow, now finally Ken is actually listening and taking the Sustainable Development Goals seriously and its role in the advertising industry more seriously. So for me it was. Yeah, it was a good it was a good feeling sitting there in the room with a lot of great fellow judges and look at the work and contemplate and look back at a decade of change.
And that moment that you were judging was very interesting because after that, I've made your course, Good Advertising, on the comments. And then we have met and have worked together on projects at Meta and other
Exactly.
things. But, and I've learned a lot with you and doing workshops connected with Good Advertising. So that was very interesting. And from that moment on Cannes Lives, that they have added this area to be valued as well. Do you believe that the brands are trying but not doing? What are the misconceptions that brands are doing in terms of that? Maybe the Volkswagen example or other examples. What are the misconceptions that brands are doing in terms of sustainable marketing or sustainability in advertising?
I mean, it's not easy, right? I mean, we as an industry operate in a reality that is becoming so short-term focused. So it's almost like marketing has become this little goldfish that's just swimming in its little bowl and it's forgetting actually where its head and where its tail is. And that's not good for any long-term change. And sustainability is often about the long-term change. So um, I think the first thing is really the perseverance and the investment over the long term. This is not just something you do a small stunt or 1 year you try and dip your toe in the sustainability diversity bucket and you're like, hey, look at us, we love people, we're so diverse. because you lose authenticity, you jeopardize the brand. So it demands a long-term investment, a long-term perspective. And if you today look at some of the few brands that have succeeded in this space and still are doing really, really well, Dove, Corona, and others who stayed on the track, who kept dedicating money to the message and to the important impact that they're doing around the world. Those are the types of brands that do really well in this space. But it is hard because CMOs change jobs every 3 to 5 years. Then there's a new agency. Then the agency want to do something new. So so there's some structural tendencies that are difficult. And then, as I said, this concept about the world of sustainability and marketing clashing constantly is not easy because the two disciplines doesn't work that well. I mean, but where I really see the magic happens is that usually in advertising, we'll sit in a white room and we'll think about telling an amazing story about Burger King or a Dove shampoo. What I love about impact work and the work I do today at Goodvertising is basically that I feel more like almost like an explorer or a scientist or that are on a hunt for a good story or like a documentarist because it is really about finding those really great stories and telling them and so because this is about reality, this is about a different way of discovering some of these things. And most companies and brands I work with, you know, not only in the sustainability report, CSR report, corporate social responsibility report, most companies have that. You can find it on the website. So if you're a strategist or creative, go and check that out. It's really like a treasure chest of amazing stories. I mean, they tell stories about what they're doing, some of the biggest challenges that they're facing, some of the biggest opportunities in this space. Already there is a lot of magic that our industry can sort of turn into something that can captivate minds, that can move market shares, that can attract a new target group, but also, more importantly, actually create change on the ground. Um, so, so why I love this field of advertising is because it's basically just about a better life. And I think great strategy and great brands actually inspire us to become better human beings, not worse human beings. And so fundamentally, I believe that the work I do around purpose, of branding, etc., is just so interconnected with what good branding should be about in the first place.
That's a strong connection that when I've learned with yourself on your course of myself as well, when I was coming back and from surviving the traumatic brain injury and looking for my purpose and my reason to be alive connects to my work as someone from as an admin. And then I found on Goodvertising that the positive impact that brands can build for the society and the environmental as well, but especially the society. And that's when I got the Meta's assets in terms of the inclusion advertising, ads for equality, on diversity, equity, and equality build to through advertising. And that is something that helped me a lot to think about how can we help the strategies. That is what I was doing before coming to Meta for over 16 years before coming to Meta, going to Meta, that I have left, and now I am doing as a consultancy, as a freelancer. But I was thinking about how we can help the strategists to build that as well, to help on that as well. Because usually people talk about the creatives and
Yeah,
not about the strategists. But how do you
yeah.
believe this? What would you give of advice for the strategists to help their clients, the clients that they're working right now when they're watching this video, how they can help the client to champion on sustainability in terms of not only advertising, but through their organizations as well, to be real, not greenwashing?
I think there's a real opportunity for for advertising strategists to step in and understand because a lot of the stuff we talk about is common sense. Sustainability is uh, you know understanding that you need the longer perspective, not just a short-term perspective. It's understanding that what ingredients are in the product, how is it made, all these things where there might be a compelling story, where there might be a conflict, where there might be something that might be a doubt in somebody's mind. If you're in certain categories, sustainability is becoming more and more commonplace and a hygiene factor. And so not understanding that well and not following um, that path might jeopardize the brand legacy and the investment that's already done in the brand. So I think the first thing that any good strategist should do is pick up that sustainability report and start reading and start asking some tough questions around some of these things. What is it that we can communicate? Is there things here that we need to change internally? How can we maybe look at programs that can make the client more um, capable of responding to some of this stuff? So suddenly you become more of a strategist to almost a business consultant in that sense. But understanding that first just makes it a much more wholesome strategy when you go in and you meet the clients, because you already know what dirty laundry is there, or what things that are there that might not have been activated already. Then secondly, I think for me, uh, it is really on fundamentally understanding that, as I said, sustainability is really just about unlocking a good life. And how do we create better lives? And one of the realizations I had years after I wrote my first book was, in fact, that now there's so many brands talking about sustainability. There's so many brands talking about purpose, who to trust. How do you build authentic brands? Which is a key question I kept being asked and also ask myself. And secondly, if we are to succeed with any of this stuff, how do we build a great business case? How can you as a strategist go in and say, we're not just doing this because we want to do good, we're actually doing this because it makes sense. We can drive, um, we can attract new target groups. This might be a business driver for something bigger. And so looking at that and looking at how difficult it was to say what brands were authentic, I started developing a new sort of model for brand building that I called the Arrow. And a lot of people on this call, I'm sure, are very familiar with Simon Sinek's work, Start With Why, which was also one of the foundational pieces of work that I looked at when I wrote Goodvertising, and which informed my very early years of building purposeful brands. But suddenly I realized that when every brand claims to have a purpose, who to trust, and that's why I had to revise and evolve my model and my thinking. And so on top of the why, I said, okay, great, Simon Sinek. I believe that people are actually buying this bigger notion, not just the product or what you're offering, but the difference between Sam and I is that I believe that the why needs to be found in who you can help people become. So rather than looking inside the company for the big why, I want to look to the customer and say, who can you help people become? And so that's one of the key questions in the error model that I ask. And what's so amazing about that is when you really sort of zoom in laser sharp on that one question, so much else unfolds. So, for example, uh, through the writing of the book, I very, very early realized that some of the most valuable brands in this world are actually what I would call transformational brands, because they play a transformative difference in my life. And that's where the authenticity comes in, because if a brand have helped create change in my life, it becomes authentic. So when Nike has provoked me, inspired me, pushed me to put on those running shoes and keep me on that track, I do see that Nike actually lives up to its ethos and its purpose. And so that's one of the key things I often tend to share with my clients as a good bullshit test. So when people talk about a purposeful brand, I often ask, so what change have your brand then wholeheartedly made? And is that something I can feel as a customer? And most of the time I hear quite a vague thing, or I hear something about donating money to somewhere or some other. Not that it's bad, but it's just not a transformative brand.
That's great. And then the first brand that came to my comes to my brain when I think about that is the one that started this thinking, Dove with the real beauty, breaking the stereotypes. I don't know, 2015, maybe I forgot when, but 10 years ago, near that. And right now here in Brazil, they have launched one against the dietarism. So elderly people using the Dove, different people, different women using Dove, and showing that the beauty is not only when you are 20, 25, 21, 16. It doesn't matter the age. So you are taking care of yourself and the beauties of that. And I found it's great. And this was, at least I've seen that last week. And this, from my point of view, is great. So that's a beautiful connection between the brand purpose and the communication. And I like Ben and Jerry's
And
as
see how amazing that is, because basically Dove is a story about self-esteem. It's a story about confidence, and so I often talk about you know human-centric values, where you can own something that's so inherently human, and that's what we try and do when we build brands. We want to build brands made for humans, and you can only do that. Like, great brands are like friends. The friends who play a meaningful difference in your life, even transformative, are the friends who stick along. The other ones you're gonna sort of lose. Maybe you don't have the same passion anymore. Maybe you don't like soccer anymore, and then you stop hanging out with those people. But those who are there, who listen to you, who feedback you, who make you better, are those who are gonna stick along for the long term. And it's the same with brands. And one of the brands I also interviewed was Kind Snacks out of the US. And Kind Snacks was founded by an Israeli immigrant to the US called Daniel Lusevsky. So he came from a very sort of divided country in Israel to another divided country in the US. And so he founded this snack bar called Kind Snacks, with the claim that because it's made out of ingredients that are kinder to the earth, kinder to your body, it promotes kindness. And it's such a human value to own. It's such an important value in this day and time, with force and prejudice and politicians who try to divide us and not unite us. And so having something so basic and foundational as a company is something that really matters both inside and outside. And Daniel shared with me that, for example, one of the things they do each year, they ask the employees, so after working Kind Snacks, do you feel more kind? Very, very basic, simple, beautiful question. And when I spoke with him, 86% of the employees said, yes, I do actually feel kinder after beginning to work in Kind Snacks. And that's an amazing achievement. That's not just some BS purpose thing that's written on the wall in a corporate headquarters. It's something that people can feel that work within the company and outside the company.
that's fantastic. And I keep thinking about that. How can we implement that more here in Latin America? And what do you think would be the challenge from your perspective, from your knowledge here in Latin America, that we would have, the strategists would have to build that during their briefs? Here in Brazil, we have the media agency and the creative agency. They are the same. I believe it's the country in the globe that has that. The two are over there, that can help to not only think about the copywriting, the communication, but the strategy, but also the mediums, because some mediums like the Meta one, I believe TikTok and others as well, they have this content that when I was doing the Meta thing, workshops on that and diversity, equity, inclusion in the creative shop team as well. In this, you could have helps from the medium as well, but mainly from a brand strategy perspective, what do you believe that in Latin America would be the key thing for us to do in terms of the brand strategy, considering the good advertising for it?
I mean, there's so many things that can be in play, can be adopted, can be done in Brazil. I mean, it's Brazil is just such a beautiful, diverse country, and that also have tons of opportunities and tons of challenges. Uh, you know, how come it be that, some people go hungry to bed? How come it be that people have tons of calories but lack nutritious food? There's so many things where brands can tap in and actually play a really truly meaningful role in society in Brazil. So I do believe that there's a lot of opportunity for that type of work and those type of brands that really want to do something. Because by the end of the day, I mean, you know, especially in the world of social, you know, I often share this analogy. The thing is that most brands try to get us to talk about their products. But I mean, if you had a dinner conversation and somebody just keep talking about the car or the iPhone or whatever, at some point that's going to be like, shut the fuck up. Sorry the language, but where typically the things we like to talk about around the dinner table are things like, oh, I'm in Rio, I'm stuck in traffic, or how come it be that, you know, uh, I don't feel safe, or how come it be that when I'm down at Copacabana, the water is always filled with plastic bottles, couldn't we clean this up? And when I was a kid, I remember lots of fish and all these things, which are societal things. And this is where, as you say, with media, that brands can talk about these things we already talk about and they can have a point of view. And that's why when we look at these types of campaigns, that's why they're so effective because they make people talk about things people really want to talk about and sometimes talk about things that are really challenging, such as stop stereotypes and beauty or X or Lynx, a brand that dared to talk about suicide amongst young men in the UK because they were so successful at killing themselves when women, when they try, it's a try. And so these things are controversial things that do really, really well in social and in the world that brands operate in today. And then secondly, I would say another advantage is around sort of sustainability and change. And when looking at the media strategy, as a strategist, so often we get captivated by, big TVC campaigns or billboards or print ads and all these things that we love. One really good other bullshit test a strategist can ask themselves is how are you able to talk to people where they are most likely to act on the message? And when you ask yourself that question, you actually figure out that if you want to create change, it often much closer to the shelf. It might actually be much closer to when people are using the product. Uh, it might actually be when you're buying the product that somebody can open your eyes to something new. And I mean, an example from Starbucks that I really love was that when they did the collaboration with the Rainforest Alliance, which is obviously to make sure that the coffee beans are produced and ethically sourced, and then people would buy the coffee, and then the Starbucks employee would ask, "Hey, Rafa, what is that little green frog on your coffee cup?" And you'd be like, "Yeah, I don't know." And then he could tell the story, and it's a very sort of personal way of sharing a bigger sustainability narrative that if you might have seen it in a TV commercial, it might have been like, okay, whatever, that's just Starbucks bragging about how it sources its coffee. So that's a very, very good way of looking at media as well, if you really want to focus on how are you best at driving change.
And on that point, how to measure? I mean, let's say the Starbucks one, what would be the best way for the strategists to measure the impact of that sustainable action that they have and the communication compared to without that? How could we measure the impact of the diversity, equity, and inclusion and the sustainability in advertising, the good advertising? How can the strategists measure that impact to make sure that stakeholders and consumers feel that's so interesting that they're buying more of that product, they're receiving more profit to help by helping people on the planet as well through advertising.
Yeah, I love that question. I think it's an important question. I think most brands today might have a sort of return of investment, brand awareness trackings, etc. But I think it's really important to create a solid sort of impact strategy as well. So what are the sort of impact metrics that we want to put down for this effort? What is it that we're trying to achieve? Is it lives changed? Is it eating habits? Is it what is it that we want to measure? The good thing is that when it comes to sustainability, there are a lot of both public metrics that you can rely on. So there are publicly available numbers, but it really begins with how do you create something that is measurable? And sometimes it's not always easy to do it in the best quantitative way. But then you can maybe take more of a qualitative approach. You can sort of observe. You can see, is there something that works? Is this something that actually seems to be changing behaviors? But fundamentally, it is to make that part of the brief in the beginning, to say what impact are we trying to achieve here, and then get the client to commit to that as well. Because when you have that and you align your business and brand goals with your impact goals, that's where the beauty really happens. And again, when you see some of these cases that we talk about, whether it's Dove or Corona, some of these other companies, they have impact metrics to show that this is not just cheap talk, but they actually also deliver impact at scale. And so this is one thing. Again, you as a strategist who are viewing this can sort of implement tomorrow at your agency and say, we need to change our templates. We need to have this conversation with our clients. And it's also a very good thing to be a little bit critical about. I watch a lot of cases, both when I judge in Cannes or D&AD or other award shows, and so often you hear two things in a case video. One is like 1 million people saw this ad, and it was covered in da 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 and Ad Age and This Press and Economist and Forbes, but that's basically not impact. You can have a lot of awareness around an issue, but nobody might not change their attitudes. And I would say, unfortunately, most of the work that I see in this space, especially also in diversity and inclusion, are preaching to the already converted. So why are you wasting your budget if you aren't opening somebody's news eyes towards their own biases, their own prejudice? Why are we wasting our money on it? Because it's not delivering the impact. And I could give you one good example from a piece of ad work, a piece of commercial that I really loved that P&G did a while back called The Talk. And you would have this Afro-American family, sitting down with I think it was a son or daughter, and you thought it was like a little chat about the bees and the flowers. But it was really heartbreaking because it was really just about how it is growing up as an Afro-American in the US, and some of those conversations that you need to give your son or daughter around race. And for me, it was a piece of work that sort of made me confront some of my own biases and made me rethink. So I think those are the types of works we need to look for, are those that changes minds, changes behaviors, that delivers real impact.
Yeah, I hope that we can do more on that in the near future, starting today. And there are a lot of things that have started. For example, the auto industry, they used to have only men driving cars on the ads. Now, at least they have a little bit of more equity on that, women doing that as well, not only men. But we have a lot of stereotypes to break, to help the people that are watching as well, to break their biases and stereotype ways of looking. And
And it's a good, and it's a good point, Rafa. So often we talk about just the direct message, what we communicate, but all those indirect messages that you're talking about around diversity and inclusion are just so important that people feel listened to, heard, included in the communication. And it might not even cost the brand anything. And the same thing also goes with sustainability. Because if you're a shampoo brand and you're not selling cars, why the heck are you showing the main person in a car? It doesn't make any sense, because it's not a sustainable way of transporting yourself around the city. And maybe your target group can't even afford a car. So maybe you also want to be a little bit inclusive to those people who rely on public transport, walking or bicycling. And I promise you that if you shoot it well, the hair blowing in the wind when you're riding a bicycle will look as beautiful. And so that's another little thing strategists can think about, is all these ways that they can reinvigorate and introduce a sustainable thinking into your typical brand books. Because most brands have brand books that say, "Oh, always show happy, smiley people." What can you do on diversity and inclusion? What rules and principles do you need to adhere to make sure that you represent? And secondly, what rules and principles do you need to adhere to showcase that you showcase and normalize sustainable behaviors? And those are two very, very simple wins for any strategist, and might actually even open up for a new work stream if you go to the brand and say, here are an inherent brand risk in what you're doing right now. We need to do this. We need to have a policy in this area. So free new business advice.
Yeah, I completely agree. And going further than the consumer insight and the creative brief, going to the culture insight as well to make those points, the conscious, social conscious insight as well, connect to the culture insight to make sure that we are helping the creatives to think more about that on the execution of that brand strategy. It's fantastic to listen to you, my friend. I had one question, but I'll hold that one for the next time, which is which football club do you support over here in Brazil, soccer team? But I know it's Corinthians. But the
Yeah,
last one is
yeah.
the resources. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
What resources and tools do you recommend? If you mentioned the Arrow, and of course the website of Goodvertising, they can find different things. And from Goodvertising book, the Hero Trap book, there are things over there that can help. What are the resources that you would recommend for the strategists to check, to read, to learn that will help them to make more Goodvertising, sustainable marketing impact on the SDGs campaigns connected to SDGs, things like that?
Yeah, luckily, compared to when I started writing my first book, Goodvertising, there wasn't a lot of literature around this topic. I was relying on a book like Grow by Jim Stengel, Simon Sinek, Public Marketing for Good, so there wasn't a lot of literature around. Today, there's a lot of literature around how to shape purposeful marketing, how to do sustainable marketing. There are lots of resources from different associations, World Federation of Advertisers to DNAD and others that create great resources. So it's a lot easier today to kind of look and find great books about the topic. Obviously, I mean, in terms of the tools that we apply, um, we have the wheel, the arrow, which is the tool that I mentioned, which is a really good methodology in terms of creating brands that are transformative, but also brands that inspire action. And the arrow is just such a simple tool. It takes you it takes you through a number of questions. It looks at what types of roles you can play in people's lives. It takes a very holistic view on people, and it sort of guides you towards how you, by the end of the day, then write what is called a transformative promise. So another way of looking at a purpose. So that's a very, very good tool to look at, and we have workshop sheets and other things. We'll also have a masterclass around this for those strategists who are more interested in actually understanding and applying that in organization, and sort of fully immerse themselves into how that tool works, some of the cases, some of the successful cases, and one of the things I'm very passionate about is that we keep updating uh, some of the things we learned along the way. So recently we did a study with GfK where we compared 20 classic purposeful commercials that take we as a company are the agent of change, with 20 transformative commercials that takes you're the change agent type of work. So that ask who can help people become. And what we found out was that the transformative ads are much better at making people more curious about the product or service. People feel much more inclined to act. They feel inspired to act. And lastly, there's also a higher willingness to pay a premium price for those brands who play a transformative role in our lives. So, to tie a little knot on that, I'm a firm believer in that, you know, if you want to create long living brands that keeps playing a meaningful role in people's lives, the sustainability agenda cannot be ignored. And too often, and for whatever reason, we don't do our homework as strategists well enough and anchor it into those sort of human truths, those human drivers that are about making us better, whether it's kindness as Kind Snacks, whether it's about creativity as Lego, whether it's about safety as Volvo. These are sort of some of those primal things that will always be relevant across times and across continents. And I think that's why, for me, I love working in this space. It makes me more creative. It makes me build better brands. And I think by the end of the day, it makes me a better strategist as well. And it makes me sleep better at night, which is also like a little added benefit.
That's what I'm looking for as well, my friend. Thanks a lot for your time. If you, I would be asking and talking to you, I would take more 24 hours of recording over here. Learned a lot with you, as you know. Thanks a lot for having the time and for having this chat and participating on my podcast to help the strategists to update themselves, but mainly to help myself to revitalize myself and learn more and relearn and have memory on what I have learned in the past, so I can be able to apply that on the jobs that I am doing now and will do in the future for brand strategies, creative strategies as a whole. Thanks a lot, my friend. Muito obrigado. Mil gracias.
Amazing. Rafa, thank you so much and keep growing.
Tchau. É isso, meus amigos. Muito obrigado por assistir
Limited.
até aqui.
Meus amigos.